Chilly here with Jupiter and I. It's already Thales moon. Jupiter point of Thales was when Uranus was direct, probably on that point. And this is Mars hour, Venus day. And the moon is 2 degrees Pisces, midheaven 6 degrees Aquarius, and ascendant approaching Beta Persei, which is a great time to check if Beta Persei is minima. It's Mars hour. Mars is 27 degrees Scorpio, and Venus is 22 degrees Libra, applying to oppose Chiron. And I actually want to talk about Rahu and Chiron while I check if Beta Persei is minima. Um, I'll go minima. Now, Chiron Rahu, one of the things that can happen with Chiron Rahu is a certain sort of detachment to what we manifest, and thereby megalithic manifestation. And this is how Chiron Rahu can actually bring even gigantic wealth or exposure to gigantic wealth. And wealth here is not in the conventional notion. We are at the onset of Saturn return for the Pluto Sagittarians, the Pluto Scorpios beginning to have their Pluto square midlife transits. Okay, Rahu is now in Pisces, accentuating. We're still in the accentuation of Rahu going through Aries, which accented the Chiron Aries, and now the Chiron Pisces. So, wealth is not just, how should I say that? I have a fourth house Gemini, and Gemini has a lot to do with the benefic distractions, particularly now when Mercury is in Jupiter. A benefic distraction. Gemini is like the child whose attention span might not be easily preserved, but there is almost magic to it. Now, we're also in the shade period of Mercury, which means, ooh, okay, we have 2 days before the minima, um, which basically means that the magic of Mercury is beginning to show itself. And Mercury retrograde can be magical in the sense that, oh, you are just, you need to find a certain, let's say, document. So you search your room, search your room, search your room, and meanwhile you find your old family pictures and that old painting that you wanted to finish. And, okay, um, yes, I found a plate on which I wrote uh, a short poem about Andromeda. Um, and this is exactly how this thing operates. So I was walking in the city. Of course, my kyanite bracelet, it's just the simple string that holds it got torn. So I said I must buy a kyanite bracelet. I did not buy a kyanite bracelet. I had a back pain, and I bought this lovely paste of. Um, yes, it's an English company, Warming Salve, um, and Neil's Yard Remedies, and it has the Tree of Life and Tree of Death painting on it. While I'm tending to abolishing weird rituals that I don't know, but this is quite interesting. And I added some cedarwood oil. By the way, I also add things to my own stuff. Like I would take my Jupiter talisman butter, Jupiter Cancer butter, and then add some cedar wood and, and put it on me um, to apply it when I need to, let's say, nourish my lower back or something. So it's just that thing. I do it to my stuff as much as I would do it to other stuff. Um, I would try it as it is and then see what refinements go with that. Now, um, while I was touring the city, um, many things came about. Uh, there was a yoga class with sunflowers in the back for the return of the bones of the kidnapped people that were murdered in Gaza. Then, this is a real story. Um, and then I walk in the just between the main streets, and there were these smaller buildings with some nice trees, and I see a picture of a missing woman who was a um, dramatologist. I thought at first I thought it was dermatologist, but no, she was a professor that researched theater and drama, and she went missing from around Ichilov when she accompanied her husband who was hospitalized there, and then she went missing. Just went missing. I looked at the charts for her going missing, for missing her going her note. Um, yes, and Venus was not 22ing yet, but the midheaven was 22ing. Um, so, but I just figured how there's so many things Neptunian around that, and you see how the lack of attachment that the trajectory, okay, of Mercury has, or um, that little magic of one detail blends with one detail, blends with one detail, and those things comprise a certain picture. That spirit is very much to do with also Rao and Chiron. Okay, the Neptune, the going towards a place, but having a wound around that place. And if you think about where Rao is where we've never been before, and Chiron is a wound that we have from birth. So um, that on an energy level creates an atmosphere of um, desire and reluctance, desire and caution, and basically it can create kind of like a daydream. And I saw a post in a trauma and dissociation group of a researcher that looks into maladaptive daydreaming, and it was a lady that had DID, and she was wondering if she's having a psychosis because she was dreaming about being a millionaire, and I think it was having a fancy mansion. I wasn't sure what it was. And to me, it was quite obvious because I know that DID is associated with ritual abuse, and ritual abuse is associated with wealth consolidation regarding natural resources under the guise of real estate, or real estate under the guise of natural. It's the real estate where the resources are basically, and her longing, okay, or her Neptunian desire, or her daydream was around wealth redistribution to basically the victim of the ritual abuse, which is her. And this daydream is basically a Neptunian void manifestation, where that dream state, that longing, has a trajectory that has a reasoning with what this lady has been dealing with, because it's the underlying cause. And I just had a megalithic eureka about the entire notion. I knew that psychosis has to do with real data, okay? In my thesis proposal, I addressed whether it's placebo effect, patterns in people that had NDE or near-death experiences, looking into the patterns, and also as a linguist, looking into the patterns where people just dismiss the data, and there is an abundance there. Now, this story is also analogous on an energy level to Chiron and Rahu conjoining, because the soul has never been a certain place before, and yet there is a wound that necessitates learning embodiment, which is Chiron. This is why when I see people turn to me regarding their Chiron, I say, first, I'm not 50 yet, my Chiron has not matured, but I do have Rahu Chiron. Secondly, everything that I will say is going to look like Swiss cheese, because with Chiron, a person reinvents their own curation. And it's their own access to embodiment or re-accessing embodiment that's going to tell them the tale of what they come to bring. Um, and this is exactly how the energy level of um, heading somewhere, and the caution is basically a manifestation where there is a desire, but there's not attachment to the outcome. And today morning, I opened the day with this notion of people going for the things that seem out of their league, because then they release the attachment to something, and then also the other people that see them as out of their league release the attachment, and who knows who will be more compatible in that sense. We can think about it as dating, or as teaching, or as life circumstances. And okay, one of the things that I did when I was in between houses was a channeling experiment. And when I was in Netherlands, then I would go, basically what I would do, because I couldn't work, I would go, for example, to a realtor and ask to see the brochures of the properties, and I would address that as I'm manifesting a home. And people were very kind to me. Okay, I was open and authentic about that topic. This is how I learned that the most expensive estates are actually floating houses, because of the risk of floods. Um, and and that would be um, quite milliseconds before the war in Ukraine, where the refugees were being housed in big cruise ships that were like hotels, um, and, and that basically was taking that situation of being in between homes and doing something with it that that allows this open door to things that now the entire nervous system, and not just nervous system, but also uh, you know, whether it's satellite watching a person going out and doing this type of act to get out of homelessness, or um, so this was where um, the lack of urgency that I had, feeling that everything, feeling that life itself was out of my league, um, basically created something that would bring about um, an energy that is tending to it and not being attached to an outcome. And you think about it, that this is the most basic thing, um, that one that one could have a sense of non-attachment around. Like, I was so not attached to having a home when I was in between houses. I was like, okay, I'll just live in a hostel or something, or a tent in a camping or something. Like, I wasn't in a rush to. And the reason was because there was such a megalithic wound around that I just developed non-attachment. And this is exactly how Rahu and Chiron can spark in this sense of non-attachment that can actually manifest quite some healing. It is also the case that with Rahu Chiron we will have segments in our life where there are fated, um, how should I say that? Fated events regarding, because Rahu is fated events, and Chiron is tending to that wound. Now, because the conjoining of Rahu, which anyway deals with something being a little bit of a fata morgana, okay, unabashed publishing to my mother's book. Um, um, and the notion of fata morgana is when a person is walking through the desert and it seems from afar that there is water, but it was just dust playing in the wind, creating an optical illusion. Okay, and as the person continues towards that place, he may not find the water that he was looking for, but there can be a quenching of another type of thirst in this um, in this state where a person can go a bit psychotic. Thank you. Okay, and in that notion, we think about the thirsty person will manifest water when they have completely given up on or surrendered the fact that they're in the desert and they don't know where will water come from. They may be a form of miraculous healing. I remember when it was a moment when I was digging in half moons, and it was in between the whole situation when I was escaping that basically place where there were rituals. Um, and I was very thirsty, and I basically spit it with my hand and put it on the soil, and somehow, in some very miraculous way, I found that refreshing. Almost like when the soil was receiving the water in the form of my own saliva while being thirsty, um, there was something that was um, almost nourishing in that connection with the soil. Almost a calling to bring in the rain or to bring the water. And this is very much, if you think about Neptune in Aries, some of it is going to look quite like that. Um, I found the power of, you know, situated in the Negev, I find the power of watering the soil and digging half moons, curating for such deep things that are miraculous that I didn't even think is possible to curate. And there are eucalyptus trees all over. So this was a swamp. This desert was a swamp. Eucalyptus tree are trees that are planted to basically dry swamps and avoid and keep people from having malaria. Because we had to give a notable mention to gate gates. Shout out to Kenya. Um, Now, on an energy level, Rahu, that is that dream where a person is fated to go towards that place that they don't know if is real or not, because they've never been there. So everything looks like Fata Morgana because the soul is thirsty for the things where they haven't been yet. For people that have Rahu in the second or Rahu ruler associated with the second, okay, you may find that sometimes what you spend money on is very bizarre to you, okay, and it feels like more important than food is to spend money on this. And I'm not talking about drugs, I'm talking about something that can be almost unexplained. Okay, if the person has, let's say, an urge to buy artwork or an urge to paint, this seems more important than food. And you pay attention of whether the things that, you know, well, it's not relevant for everybody, but for some people, it might be more relevant than we can even imagine. Young entrepreneurs, for example, or people that are homelessness, or okay, think about the things that are more important to buy, even when you don't know if you will have money for food. And this is because with Rahu, you haven't been there yet. A lot of people that are new money, okay? I've been watching Albina's podcast with the privileged few, and she talked a lot about the fact that her family is new money, and she's not trying to hide or be inauthentic about the fact that she was not used to, or her family was not used to grow with generations upon generations of the big and fancy things, and consumerism of the new money type of consumerism was actually quite interesting. She was not trying to hide um, that it is interesting to her. And this can be the notion of families that haven't been there before. And so, for example, if I think I don't know my family that much because um, as many of them died in the Holocaust, and they were from Sarny, which is kind of like a village. So I don't know if it was a rich village, a poor village, or I don't know anything about that. Um, about that part of the family. Um, but for me, when I was a young girl, I was just thinking, well, I was kind of like Gen Zers. It's the kind of buses everybody needs to buy a house in cash. Um, and the car that I was thinking to buy my mom was at first was a Ford. Like I wasn't thinking about luxury. I was thinking about the buses for my family. And at that time, I was living with my mom at my grandmom to go to the particular school, which was a public school, but a school that, it's kind of like the people in that area went to. So, um, and at very young age, I didn't grow up with disdain for rich people because I was like, okay, I need to learn what they're doing. But like these rich people, okay, even if they're born into a rich family, they still need to preserve the wealth. So, um, so that notion and the combination of never having been there before and yet having some sort of innate knowing that I don't know where it's coming from. Okay, my one of my parents would have Ketu in my eighth house. Um, which would mean that eighth house is also inheritance or intergenerational wealth. And Ketu there would mean that it brings a trajectory of having had that going towards being able to buy a house in cash or being able to be a first generation wealth. Okay, and it's not of my mom. For her, it's like for her, it's just like me. It's Ketu in the 10th house, but her Ketu is in my 8th house, and indeed, she thought her daughter will have a house, and we still, with the influx and changes in interest and challenges to have and keep a workplace that is actually, just actually a wealth that is actually wealthy, we lost that intergenerational wealth. Okay, or I lost that intergenerational wealth, but the growing was to be first generation, to be able to buy a house with my income as a first generation. So holding the perspective of lost intergenerational wealth, it created with my own Rowing the Fourth a lack of attachment to owning a house. While my parent had around the fourth house in Aries, and that belief of at least my daughter will have a house. Okay, that hard work to create a home, to keep the house, to make sure that there is the basic stability. And as I'm looking at things from the perspective of wealth consolidation and the rituals around that, there is growing non-attachment regarding the entire fourth house thing, whether it's countries, nations, lineage, having a family, home and housing, okay? And this non-attachment is not about not tending to that, it's about understanding the many components of home and that there is an embodiment thing to do with that housing has another chapter that my parent was exploring the first chapter of. because she was eager to buy a house. She was eager to work, to have a family, to have a child, um, and to make sure that the child will have, you know, basically to make sure that the child will have a house. And then she had a child where her Rahu is in her child's second house, which is the money we make ourselves, and Ketu in the eighth house. So for me, it meant that no matter how much I tried to save money, that was that was going down the drain. And with Neptune, she had also Neptune in Libra, so it was like Neptune completely having to surrender and being a hardworking person, and quite successful at school and megalitically successful at work. Okay, so much so that the entire every workplace will have an entire revolution when I would go through that. I don't prescribe that to any business. Take it would rock your foundation from the core to the crown, um, and there may have been crowns touched by that. Okay, I'm not a simple person to have at any place, including a residence, um, which makes it quite challenging for me. And and at the same time, I'm the perfect person to curate the issues that that would otherwise disinclude people like me, and disinclude wealth from wealthy. Okay, because it's those anomalies that give us the things that have been missing. Here, a lot of people work hard, save money, just when they want to cash in on the money. And shout out to Seizure Girl, because she is growing out of, she was survivor of trafficking, she was growing out of basically income-based residence. And there were still people in her comments when she openly talked about having to rely on welfare, um, still thinking that it was about her not knowing how to spend her money. And I'm like, I'm just looking at these people at 40, being 41, I'm looking at these people that comment to her, and some of them in their 40s, their 60s, their 70s, and I'm like, boy, oh boy, just when they want to cash in on their passive income, 401k, whatnot, just when, I saw, and not to scare anybody, but I saw there are going to be a lot of real estate scams with Neptune in Mars sign, and I saw a case. One of the Clippies wrote about that, where an 80 years old woman one day finds a squatter in her house that tells her that it's their place now, and she was basically, they forged documents, and she was basically unable to access her own house, her residence, okay, at age 80. And US of A. All it takes is to forge documents, and unfortunately with Saturn Neptune, there are going to be megalithic events regarding that. What was painful to me was that this was an 80 years old woman, and that was her residence. Okay, for people that are, there are other cases where people can absorb that kind of activity because their way of getting, if people create wars to take over real estate, we're not too sorry when there is a law passed that they can't do real estate investments in an area where there was, let's say, a genocide. Um, so my comment to the people that were, criticizing the human trafficking survivor that's coming out of house-based income on their money spending. Okay, was Algar Hiss. Algar Hiss was working through and through with all the oil and all the gold, and he was jailed. He was treason. when you work for a treason company, treason code, then um, then when algor his is what I would say to the people who think to benefit from creating treason, because this is where they would house that person, which is why each and every one of us needs to tend to the topic of jail system, hospitals, apotropsy, okay, and the understanding that the veil of ignorance. This is perhaps why Saturn is weak at Aries. Okay, it's strong in Libra, but it's weak at Aries because Saturn is tradition, and what people, if I would listen to the advice I got when I was homeless, I would probably have to commit a genocide and be algorist, because um, and um, and this is exactly why Saturn sucks at Aries, because Aries is the new, and Saturn is the rules and the old rules. And Saturn in Aries is kind of like, well, good morning. There are new rules to karma. I thought if I would work hard and pay and save money and so on, then I will have, at least my children will have a house and build intergenerational wealth and so on and so forth. Um, and then somebody comes in, forges some documents, and your residence has been. By the way, for night charts, I do not recommend to forge documents. Um, Saturn rules bureaucracy. Um, and for day charts, I do not recommend to. Night charts would anyway, I hope, won't get into that dumb fuckery. Um, it's undesirable, and if they do, it's even more harmful. But day charts, I do not recommend them to try to get other people into debt, because and the reason being, night chart definitely not. It can backfire so malefically that they won't even. But day charts, um, they will. It means that they will deal with an opponent who could be a night chart, and they don't have the ability to go by the rules, which means that um, okay. When a person can go by the rules, then at least there are rules, is what I'm saying. And night charts can't go by the rules. Night charts basically have to renew the rules or reform the rules in the best of cases. But their malefic of sect is Mars, and Mars is about something broken. Saturn is rules. Um, so for them, the path is okay for to break the rules, and Saturn takes a different notion in that, because it's not about breaking the rules for the sake of breaking the rules. It's about breaking the rules for the sake of having rules that are accommodating for what the previous rules didn't. Okay, and this is where Saturn in Aries is Saturn in Mars sign, and that's a sign of innovation, and it's basically forming rules in unforeseen territories, or forming structures in unforeseen territories. Very bad for people who rely on um, having a tradition. Okay, just think about this story. 80 years old woman dealing with a new generation of homeless people, that one was meticulous and hardworking at forging documents, and now they own the place. They made new rules. And okay, so this is Saturn. This is Saturn. Right now Saturn is in Pisces. Um, but you think about Saturn in Aries, which is there were no. Okay, it's both there were no rules to something, but also the people that went by the rules with Saturn in Aries are having those rules broken. And this particularly noting to people that were Orthodox and Satanic, because Satanic is also Saturn. And so, um, what does it mean? Okay, I don't know. It can be good thing, bad thing. Like I really don't know. But Saturn in Mars sign basically means broken rules. Um, if it is Scorpio, it is to transform the rules from the core, to see what do those rules not represent and transform them from the core. It might also mean, depending on where Mars is, where those who try to enslave people, particularly in a psychological or sexual way, being murdered. Okay, but by the way, the structure of extortion cult is such by definition. It's not okay. It's just it's such by definition. Um, but this is another thing to note around that now that Saturn is approaching both that Mars is approaching opposition to Uranus. Um, more things to think about with Karen Rao. Um, Definitely, Chiron Rahu can tend to manifest the, those things um, that the person kind of like never been there before, and it is the conjoining of feeling helpless around something and knowing that they're going there. Okay. And what if that thing was actually something to do, with the people that have also Neptune? Then that can already give certain significations. Um, okay, and the notion of being, um, how should I say that? Then think about the fact that, um, let's say a person is born to a certain bloodline, and that bloodline is seen as um, business people, clergy, or whatnot. They can either reform the business world or the clergy, um, because for them it's like they're going that trajectory. Okay, that I talked about the fact that in the past, when we see all the famous philosophers and doctors, they were also clergy, and in Vedic astrology, or yes, depending which, or Ayurvedic astrology, um, there is the notion of certain moon nakshatras being associated with the clergy and merchants. I'm one of these moon nakshatras, so if I think about the things that I'm being exposed to upon my Rahu maturation, is Volk, okay, Dutch East India, was from my fatherland. Um, the cloning problem, okay, the things to do with the Vatican starting off as at times being a prisoner of war in the Vatican, okay, to preserve the Roman Catholic Church. The topics of ritual abuse, the way women are treated, okay, in certain sectors, and that kind of makes it, if I think about um, one of the last students that I had when I was teaching English before COVID. I was in the busiest semester and I took extra courses not knowing that I don't even need to, and then kept them. And then somebody called me to have their child enrolling in English classes. And it started off with, oh my gosh, I'm very busy, I'm very this, I'm very that. Then he insisted to enroll his child. And that was all authentic, okay? I was not making up. Now, that person worked at the water municipality. Their colleague worked at the infrastructure municipality. And their colleague's daughter also needed classes. And then the younger child needed classes. Um, and it took a very intense interference from the people that targeted me to break that lineage apart. Um, while one of the children was basically learning about Satanism and seeing it as karma for rapists. That's basically was what she was exposed to, and exactly. Yes, but and now there was a trajectory where one thing led to another and many interests were involved, but I would definitely need to fill in the gap when it comes to those, okay, the many things that could come up that I would not even know about, that are not just pertaining to that teenager. Um, but just to think how that manifestation of like an entire lineage and all the information about like the infrastructure and the watering that they do it with, the water the parks with water that is basically polluted, and it's going to be a lot of risks of diseases and all these things that I would never have any way of knowing. Okay, particularly at the time when were doing grounding and trying to walk barefoot everywhere. Goodness gracious, I'm an aromatherapist, so um, but just to think about how this Rahu Chiron, and thinking about teaching elementary school has to do with the fourth house as well, and Mercury's communication, and how that in that situation where I was not busy with having many students, but busy with, miscalculating my load as a student, basically made me more attractive to the families that were exactly the right clients for me, because they saw their children, they saw me as kind of like the cherry on top. The children do all the homework, do all the extracurricular activity, do all the things that they want, and then they have an English teacher, which was fantastic for me because then I could go on and say, okay, what are your aspirations in life? What are your dreams? let's work on that, but in English. And that actually created um, fulfilling job for me and an experience that was favorable for the students. Now you think about how this Rahu Chiron here played a role in making me have non-attachment around building that legacy, okay? This is and it conjoined with the fact that my parent had a private business. When they closed that business, there was so much bureaucracy that they told me never to open a business, which of course I didn't listen to. And now, lo and behold, the bureaucracy is such that if I would be required to do due diligence, those that would require me would have to do the due diligence to actually go and get my documents from the place that is unsafe for me to even communicate with, because it had to do with ritual occult and trafficking. Where from my perspective, I was just um, arriving to be a tenant, which means that I have full diplomatic immunity. Okay, so you think about the fact that my parent had to deal with all that, having an accountant and closing the accountancy. Accountancy, yes. Um, but with my case, it was kind of dissolving into a situation where the very thing that kept my business from growing, which was those ritualistic cults that try to take over the ability of people to make a living, now those very sources have to do their own due diligence for me to do my due diligence. And so we can see how this non attachment yet again created a situation where everybody that relied on the old rules, okay, everybody that relied on that being my problem or me being considered a tax evader or tax offender or whatnot, now is having a problem, okay, and it's a Saturn cycle, okay, that's a Saturn. Okay, that's a Saturn cycle. Um, I haven't socially engineered that, but those that try to enslave basically will have to do due diligence. And okay, so think about Rahu Chiron as the curative power of um, sometimes being so overwhelmed by something that you physically cannot act, and how that delay to meeting the gratification of Rahu creates, in a roundabout way, abundance. That being said, Chiron is Chiron. Okay? For me, I had a non attachment energy around opening a business, which that helplessness was transforming to dreaming big and tending to it, but also not being so overwhelmed that, remember there was a woman that was given advice for entrepreneurs and she was in the 30 before 30 in Forbes, and then she had a heart attack. A heart attack. It was before COVID, I think. From stress. She worked herself to death. And fortunately, she survived that heart attack, but it definitely made her reconsider the hustle. So definitely when I saw that, and I was like, well, they're gonna have to have a whole new, if we're going to look to entrepreneurship to make a life while making a living, and not being the old corporational notion, then we definitely are going to reinvent the wheel, which means that we definitely need rest. If what we're manifesting is a place where, okay, so this creates such an overwhelm where it's like dreaming, not attachment, dreaming, overwhelm, dreaming. And this is exactly how Neptune can operate, because Neptune can be so overwhelming that we're like falling asleep or falling dizzy or um, okay, or being in that void state. For me, for example, a lot of things to do with housing, but also um, with Netherlands, because I would not have like, because having a home in Netherlands seems like something that can never happen. Um, then it interfered with my language acquisition, and it kind of created an atmosphere of unconditional love, because I had to question myself. It was not, first of all, I wouldn't want to put like the effort into a place that wouldn't want me there or wouldn't accommodate for me there. And yet there were things that I was tending to, and um, at the same time, there was, yes, a desire to show, kind of to put my best foot forward, and all of that mixing into something very condensed, um, together with the fact that the first documents that I read in Dutch were legal documents. And um, so that imbued with that, imbued with that, imbued with that, created a trajectory where there is interest, there is, okay, there's something that pushes forward, and there's something that pulls back, and it kind of creates an atmosphere of um, the almost the necessary reluctance, that is almost like a dance that manifests something bigger and bigger without me setting any particular trajectory to that. And this is the conjoining of the wound, okay? Okay, the conjoining of the wound, um, the question, okay, and the understanding that, wait a second, my Israeli mom is hell Dutch. um, that even in nearing cultures, I need Dutch culture or something that reminds me of, um, or just many things, that unexpected familial I know that the word familial is funny in that